Hyrum is a co-founder of Franklin Covey. He's also a highly sought-after keynote speaker and author. For 4 decades, he's been motivating people to see reality more clearly and to gain better control of their personal and professional lives. Hyrum's speeches and presentations have been acclaimed by American and international audiences. He's the author of several nationally published books, including 3 Gaps, Are You Making a Difference?, The Natural Law of Successful Time and Life Management, What Matters Most, The Advanced Day Planner's User Guide, The Modern Gladiator, the one I've just given to my boss, Purposeful Retirement, and is the co-author of Excellence Through Time Management. As I was visiting with him for a bit before, it's obvious, he just told me that he had his 25th anniversary of his 50th birthday. It's pretty clear to me that he is living what is written in his book, where he says, you may have quit a job, but you don't have to quit life. Can you please join me in welcoming Hyrum Smith to the stage?
Thank you, sir. My favorite part of that introduction is Hyrum Smith is a highly sought-after public speaker. I wrote that. That's pretty cool. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Come on, good morning.
Good morning.
Are you excited?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I live in St. George, and so I left early this morning so I could be on time for your class. The lowest temperature I drove through was -5, and the highest is here, which is 25. St. George is better. Trust me. Listen, we're going to accomplish in about 44 minutes today what normally takes 3 hours. Are you excited?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to do 3 things for me. If you'll do these 3 things for me, what I'll share with you today can make a serious impact in your life, personal and professional. But you have to do 3 things. Number 1, I'm going to ask you to take notes. Don't be offended by this. You're in a place where you're used to taking notes. So if you got something to take notes on, produce it now. Don't be offended by this, but I'm going to be very specific about what I ask you to write today. We've discovered that people have to hear something 6 times before it impacts their behavior. So I figure if you hear it, see it, write it, we're halfway there. Second, I'm going to ask you to think about what you've written in these notes for 36 hours. Just think about it. Last, I'm going to ask you to teach one other person what you've written in your notes within 48 hours of now. It can be a friend, associate, somebody on the bus, spouse if you're married. Teach it to some other person. If you'll do those 3 things for me, I'll promise that the stuff I share with you today will make a difference in your life. Do I have a deal? Okay, because I've been involved in time management a lot of years, and by the way, just for my interest, how many of you ever heard of a Franklin planner? Maybe show of hands? I'm excited. You might be interested to know that the Franklin planner, which I have lying on the deck here, in Utah is referred to as the only true book. It's a joke. Because I've been in time management all these years, people think, well, he's going to talk about time management. I'm not really here to talk about time management today, but I'm going to share with you one powerful time management tip that will change your lives when you get out into the world. I was doing a seminar for Hewlett-Packard about 25 years ago in Colorado, about 65 engineers for a full day on time management. I discovered, by the way, that engineers are really weird. Any engineers here? Weird. Certifiably weird. When I got to that part of our workshop that dealt with interruptions, I decided, you know, by the way, you remember what an interruption is? This is when someone comes into your office under the mistaken belief that you care. And the issue is, how do you get that person out of your office so you can stay focused on what matters most to you? So when we got to that part of the say, okay, engineers, somebody comes into your office, you want to stay focused on what matters most to you. How do you get that person out of your office? An engineer stood up right here, stone sober, and said, throw up on your desk. I said, probably effective. Second guy stands up over here and says, well, how often can you do that in a day? That's your tip. I have a friend, no kidding, he cut 2 inches off the front legs of all the chairs in his office. Nobody can stay in his office. It's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but it's interesting. All right, the first thing I'm going to ask you to write today comes with a story. Because I've been involved in time management all these years, in the last 40 years, I have probably had 1,000 people, and I'm not exaggerating, come up to me before or after a speech or seminar, and they always lower their voice, and they look around to make sure nobody's listening, and then they say, you know, Hyrum, I wish I lived 100 years ago when they had more time. Really? How much more time did they have? Oh, they had a lot more time. You know what the only difference is between today and 100 years ago? We have more options than they had. Why do we have more options? Because we do stuff faster. That's why. We are into speed. If my grandfather missed a train, no big deal. 24 hours, catch another train. If my father missed an airplane, no big deal. 5 hours, catch another airplane. If I miss one section of a revolving door, I go nuts. And so do you. And why do we do that? Because we're into speed, that's why. Would you tolerate the speed of a PC 15 years ago today? Do you remember the old, you probably don't even remember a dot matrix printer. Anybody here know what a dot matrix printer is? Yeah, we used to stand there in awe and watch them spin. You wouldn't tolerate that today. Now I'm going to make a statement. If you don't remember a thing I say today, remember this statement. In fact, if you have a compelling need for a tattoo, this would be a great tattoo. I want you to listen first and then write it. Here we go. The basic principles that help a human being become more productive and effective have not changed for 6,000 years. Write it. The basic principles that help a human being become more productive and effective have not changed for 6,000 years. Every generation has to rediscover these principles. We give new names to them. We write books about them. A good friend of mine wrote a book. I bought his company in 1997. 7 Habits of Stuff. I wrote a book. What Matters Most? Read either book. There's not a new idea in either book. It's criminal, really. We make money at that stuff. How many of you ever heard of the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? You know what one of the 7 habits of highly effective people is? This is a little heavy for a Thursday morning. Here comes one of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Hold on to your chair. Be proactive. Whoa. Gives you goosebumps, doesn't it? 6,000-year-old idea. Want to hear another one? Here comes another one of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Hold on to your chairs. First things first. Whoa. Makes the hair stand on your neck. Got to be 21st century, right? 6,000-year-old idea. And a guy named Covey comes along, lives not far from here, used to, and he puts 7 of those together, and he calls it, hey, this is 7 habits of highly effective people. And the world goes nuts. 17 million copies of that book. Do you know what a successful book is for Simon & Schuster? 50,000 copies is a roaring successful book. 17 million copies. 78 foreign language translations. Now, what's the magic? There was magic. What's the genius? Stephen Covey was a genius. They used to hook him up to a computer at night, put these things on his forehead, hook him into a USB on a computer, and the next morning there'd be another book on the bed. It's true. Guy was amazing. The magic was putting the 7 together. The genius was the way they are taught for the 21st century. But the basic principles, folks, haven't changed for a long time. Now, why do I start with that? What I'm going to share with you today, folks, happens to be really old stuff that is very relevant today. Why? You know what hasn't changed in the last 100 or 500 years? You and me. We're folks. We're people. We get out of bed every morning, put our pants on one leg at a time. Got to go to the bathroom three times a day. You get as old as Norm, it's 9. No. We're folks. So what has changed in the last 100 years? The tools with which we implement these principles are changing at warp speed. Look at the number of laptops in here. Look at the cell phones and all that stuff. Just tools to implement very old ideas. Okay, I want to talk about language today, and I'm going to ask you now to commit to memory a statement that my father forced us to memorize when I was 12. I grew up in Hawaii, in Honolulu. My father was the president of the speech department at the University of Hawaii. Growing up in Hawaii, I mastered a thing called Pidgin English. If you've ever been to Hawaii, that won't mean anything to you, but it's really awful English. I was an embarrassment to the president of the speech department because when he'd have people over from the university, I was asked to be absent because I didn't speak the language well. So he had us memorize this statement. Here, I want you to memorize this today. This would make an even better tattoo than the first one. Listen first and then write it. He said, "You cannot think any deeper than your vocabulary will allow you to." Write it. You cannot think any deeper than your vocabulary will allow you to. Do you believe that? Say that with me. You cannot think any deeper than your vocabulary will allow you to. Louder, one more time. You cannot think any deeper than your vocabulary will allow you to. How many words do you think there are in the English language? Anyone? Don't go to Siri. Approximately 340,000 words. Winston Churchill had the largest working vocabulary of anyone we know about in the English-speaking world. He had a working vocabulary of 25,000 words. The average business person in America, men and women, have a working vocabulary of around 13,000 to 14,000 words. The average teenager in America has a working vocabulary of about 2,200. Now do the math. In all the studies that they have done on successful people, one of these days, Norm, I'm going to find out who they are because they do some great studies. In all the studies they've done about successful people in any walk of life, the one common denominator they found in all of those successful people was a large working vocabulary. They knew their language and they knew how to use it. I'm going to make a plea today, beg you to build your vocabularies. There is only one way to build a vocabulary. You tell me what it is. Shout it out. Read. You've got to read. Our kids aren't reading anymore. They got these mindless digital things they're fooling around with all day long, and they're not reading. In 1986, the U.S. attorney in Salt Lake City of Utah asked me if I would go with him to every high school in the state and put on an assembly and try and talk the kids in Utah out of drugs and alcohol. Between 1986 and 89, we went to 148 schools. Halfway through this experience, we discovered we were wasting our time in the high schools. Why? The average age for starting drugs and alcohol in this state is age 12. So we started going to elementary and middle schools. On one occasion, when we were about 2/3 of the way through this, because we would arrive at the high schools at the same time they would ring the bell to release all the kids from their classes to go to the auditorium for the assembly, and there's two guys from the Utah Jazz basketball team would go over each time, so I got to know all those guys, John Stockton, and those are great guys. Because we would be walking through the halls now, they'd ring the bell, all the kids are going to the auditorium, and we're going to the auditorium too. And I found myself walking through the halls with thousands of kids from this state. And I started to listen to the vocabulary I was hearing in the hall. What do you think I heard? It was pretty awful. And I found myself thinking, you know, if this is the level of thinking going on in our high schools, we got a big problem. If you want a scary experience, find a high school graduate from any high school in this state, hand them something to read, and would you orally interpret that? Read it out loud and listen to them. It's pretty awful. There is one four-letter word that if they ever make me king, I would probably get rid of. And that's the word like. Like. How often do you hear the word like in your conversations with your friends? How often do you hear the word like in a class? Why do you use the word like so much? This is where you talk, by the way. Why? Yeah, it's not rocket science because we don't know any other words. And so we use the word like to give us time to think to get to the next word. Only the problem is it's coming every third and fourth word now. Listen in the next hour. If you want a real experience, commit to, get 10 of your friends together and make a commitment. We won't use the word like for 2 hours today. It gets real quiet for 2 hours. Okay, because we overuse the word. Now, there are obviously places where the word like works. It's okay. But not every third word. The reason is because we don't have any other words. So build your vocabularies. There is a two-letter word that I would drastically reduce in use. And that's the word so. So. How often do you hear the word so? Why does almost every sentence you start with the word so? It's because we don't know any other word. So, I'm pleading with you, build your vocabularies. Go build it from 2300 up to, you may not get to Winston Churchill, but get up there. I will tell you that if you know your language and know how to use it well, you can write your own ticket when you get out into the world. It makes a big difference. Now, because it makes a big difference, there are 4 words. I was on an airplane a long time ago, and I started making a list of words that I thought described the man Jesus Christ. Now, that doesn't offend anybody here, but I happen to think a lot of that man, and so I started making a list of words that described characteristics that I thought he had. If you want an interesting experience, pick somebody who you highly respect and start making a list of the characteristics that you think they have. And then ask yourselves, what's the definition, or how do I understand the word that describes that characteristic? It took 4 or 5 plane rides. I ended up with a list of 100 words that I thought described this man. It's really interesting. After I made the 100 words, I looked at it and I went into a state of depression for about a month. Because you're like, I got to be like that. There's no way. But it's interesting to look at a list like this. Now, I'm just take 4 words off of that list today. I'm going to ask you to write the word and then write a definition. The definitions are mine. They're not dictionary. But they're words that matter. Will you first write the word character, and then will you write a definition? This is not a dictionary definition. It's my definition. I had that one simple, and I've checked it with Webster, and we're sort of okay. All right, here we go. Character is the ability to carry out a worthy decision after the emotion of making that decision has passed. Character is the ability to carry out a worthy decision after the emotion of making that decision has passed. About 44 years ago, I was working for a company called ADP out of New York City, Automatic Data Processing. I had a ceremony every morning about 9 a.m. I'd walk down 2 quarters into a wonderful lunchroom where I would pay homage to a shrine every day. It was a candy bar machine. I'd slip a quarter into that little slot and retrieve a Heath candy bar. Have you ever had a Heath candy bar? They are wonderful. You know, they just came out with a soft one. I'd take them with a needle if I could. On one occasion, I was standing in front. It's not funny. On one occasion, I was standing in front of my shrine, about to get my daily fix of chocolate. Two fellows sitting across the room, obviously thinking I could not hear. One of them said to the other, "Hyrum is getting porky, isn't he?" I froze in midair with my quarter, looked over to see who it was, put it back in my pocket, and stormed out of the lunchroom. Now, you need to understand, at that point, I weighed 230 pounds. That's 40 pounds too many for me. My wife had been on me for 2 years to lose the weight. Now, you need to understand, my wife's an unbelievable athlete. She played basketball, volleyball, and softball for Brigham Young University, held the broad jump record at that university for 9 years. Drives me crazy. I was a mission president for the Mormon Church for 3 years, a lot of years ago. We used to play basketball with our missionaries on Monday. They would choose her first. Isn't it funny? Finally picked up the phone and I called my wife. This time I'm going to lose the weight. I was emotionally involved. How long do you think that commitment lasted? 4 hours. What happens in 4 hours when you make a commitment like that? You get hungry. That's what happens. And you find yourself sitting on the third shelf of the refrigerator eating everything you can get your hands on. Character, simply stated, is doing what you say you're going to do. Next word, there's 2 words, mental toughness. Let me tell you a quick experience about why I'm going to ask you to write another statement that you're going to have a lot of tattoos when you leave, but this is a big one. 3 weeks after 9/11, my phone rang. It was Rudy Giuliani. I met him it's a long story how I met him, but he's a good friend. He called me and said, "Hyrum, I've got a lot of people in pain in Manhattan because of what happened here on 9/11 3 weeks ago. Would you and your partner, Stephen Covey, would you come to New York and would you do a full-day workshop for the families affected by 9/11? Well, of course we'll come. Wait a second, Hyrum, we can't pay you. We can't even pay your travel here, you know, but the Midtown Sheraton is donating their ballroom, donating the rooms. Would you come? Of course we'll come. When do you want us to come? 19 October. 18 October, Steve Covey and I flew out of Salt Lake. I've flown into New York hundreds of times. This time it was different. As we flew up the Hudson River towards the airport, I looked down and there was a big hole in the bottom of Manhattan and lights around it and smoke coming up. It was a pretty surreal experience. We checked into our rooms late. Rudy had arranged for a tour of Ground Zero for me and Steve the next morning at 5 a.m. So a police van picked us up, drove us down to Ground Zero. We had to go through 4 police checkpoints. You couldn't get anywhere near Ground Zero at that point. 1,600 policemen had cordoned off Ground Zero. When we got down there, we got out of this van, and the policeman was our escort, and I was standing on 15 feet of compacted debris, and I'm looking at this unbelievable hole. And the policeman who was our escort, he said, "You know, guys, I was here that day." And he got all animated. He said, "I was standing right over here," and he pointed like that. And he said, "You know, I heard this big boom, and I looked up, and all this stuff came flying out of the World Trade Center." He said, "It looked like paper at first. But then it started hitting the ground. It was 50-foot I-beams killing everybody it hit." He said, "I watched 34 people jump from the tower. 4 of them were holding hands when they jumped." Excuse me. "I watched 8 policemen lose their lives because people fell on the policeman." And I'm thinking, oh, man. And then he looks at me and he says, "Mr. Smith, how many computers do you think there were in the World Trade Center?" I said, "I don't know. 50,000 people work there. I bet there are a lot of computers." He said, "We haven't found one computer." I said, "How come?" He said, 3,000-degree fire, man, and it's still burning." And while he was talking, a crane pulled an I-beam out of the rubble, and it was dripping molten steel at the bottom. Well, then he finished his story. The second building came down. He got under a truck, and somehow he survived. That's how the morning starts. We come back up to the Midtown Sheraton Hotel. We had to shower because we were covered with soot. We come down to this ballroom. It's designed for 1,800 people, 2,300 people jammed into this ballroom. It started by 2 policemen and 2 firemen, dressed blue uniforms. They marched in with their, with the American flag. Well, that wiped me out. I'm bawling like a baby. Then the Harlem Girls Choir marches in, 60 young women, and they sang 3 patriotic songs. Most magnificent music I've ever heard. So I'm just a mess. I was glad that Covey spoke first. So he did his thing. Now it's my turn. I had to step over people to get to the microphone. By the way, do you like my dress tennis shoes? They're cool. It's got nothing to do with this positioning. Anyway, when I got to the microphone, before I could open my mouth, about halfway back, there was a policeman in a dress blue uniform, jumps out of his chair, shouts at me in front of all these people, and he says, "Mr. Smith, are you going to tell us how we get out of bed in the morning when we just don't give a crap anymore?" That's how it started. This turned out to be one of the toughest and maybe most rewarding speaking experiences I have ever had. And I looked at this fireman and I said these words. And these are the words I want you to write down and tattoo somewhere on your body. I said, "Pain is inevitable. Misery is optional." Pain is inevitable. Misery is optional. And then I said to this crowd, I said, "Now what point am I trying to make, folks?" I said, "The fact is, bad things happen to good people. Do they not?" And I said, just for a minute, I said, I will never demean or put down or minimize what happened here on 9/11. It was bad. But just for a minute, would you people compare what happened here on 9/11 to what's happened on this planet in the last 150 years? And I'll tell you something, folks. What happened here on 9/11 doesn't even come up on the scope of ugliness in comparison. Does it? And I said, let's go back to June 6, 1944. Now, let's go back to June 5th, 1944. Eisenhower's in a bunker in England. And you know what he said to his generals? He said, "Gentlemen, we have to throw more kids at that beach tomorrow than they have bullets in the bunker." He wrote about it in his memoirs. And you know what they did the next day? They threw 200,000 kids at Normandy. Eisenhower estimated within 500 how many he'd lose because he'd estimated the bullets in the bunker. How often do we cherish that or reverence that? 8,000 guys died in about 7 hours. How often do we reverence, think any battle in the Pacific? By the way, there's a new World War II museum in New Orleans that you must see before you die. You must go there. They spent $400 million building an unbelievable museum. I'm in the process now of helping them develop some training that they want to do there. It's amazing. And why in New Orleans? Because the Higgins boats were built in New Orleans. You know what a Higgins boat is? Remember the scenes of the boats going up on Normandy and the big front flops down and the guys run out into the machine guns? That's a Higgins boat. They were built by the Higgins family in New Orleans, and so that's where the museum is. They built 2,700 Higgins boats in New Orleans. Anyway, you got to go. Study any battle in that war. We lost 240,000 men in the Second World War. Go back to the Civil War. We lost more men in the Civil War than in all the wars we fought in combined. 640,000 men, so that we could be free. How often do we reverence that? The point is, folks, we have a choice to make when we experience pain. We can be miserable or not. Some of the most serene, magnificent, unbelievably powerful people I have ever known are people that have had to deal with unbelievable pain. There's lots of different kinds of pain. There's psychological pain, there's emotional pain, there's spiritual pain, there's all kinds of pain. You don't have to choose to be miserable. Okay, next we, excuse me. I'm going to ask you to write the word forgiveness. I'm going to grab this drink of water here quick. The reason I share this definition with you, because it matters a lot to me personally. Learned a lot about this one in the last 30 years. We perpetuate a myth in our culture that says for forgiveness to be complete, we have to forget what happened. And I want to tell you that that is the biggest pile of garbage I've ever heard. I think there are only probably 2 people in the universe are capable of forgetting, and that's probably God and His Son. We don't forget, and I don't think we're supposed to. Here's my definition. Write this and please give it some thought. Forgiving requires remembering. And in remembering, deciding it doesn't matter anymore. Forgiveness requires remembering, and in remembering, deciding it doesn't matter anymore. I want to give you the most powerful example I've seen this in my entire life. The Battle of Iwo Jima that took place February 1945. Does that name ring a bell? Iwo Jima. Does that name ring a bell? Study it. Iwo Jima is an island 2 miles across and 4 miles wide. There was an airstrip on it. It was 600 miles south of Japan. It was a Japanese island. All of the other islands they had taken during the Second World War weren't theirs. The Philippines and all those. When we had taken all those islands back, we started sending B-29s to bomb Japan. They had to fly right over the top of Iwo Jima. Japanese fighters would come up off Iwo Jima and just shoot the crap out of our planes. We didn't like that. So we decided we had to have the island. For 4 months, they bombed Iwo Jima incessantly. 4 days before the D-Day, they bombed it 24/7. Millions of tons of bombs. We thought we'd kill everybody on the island. We thought that there were about 8,000 Japanese soldiers on the island. Turned out there were 23,000. There are 800 American and Australian ships surrounding this little island. The commander of the troops on Iwo Jima told his soldiers, your job is to kill 8 Marines or 10 Marines, and then you kill yourself because we do not surrender. Their culture looks at people who surrender are cowards. That's why they treated people on the march to Bataan so awful. They had surrendered to the Japanese, so they were lower than animals. He had studied, Colonel Kurobayashi had studied Normandy. He said, I think the Germans made a mistake. They shot at those guys when they came on the beach. I think that's a mistake. So he decided to wait. He targeted every square inch of that black sand beach with small arms weapons, artillery, mortars. He waited 2 hours. And the Marines clogged that beach. And there were 100,000 people, either on the beach or on their way in. And the Marines were thinking, man, this is a cakewalk. Nobody's here. We killed everybody. And 2 hours in, when the beach is clogged with men and equipment, Kurobayashi gave the signal, and they opened fire. And in 36 hours, they killed 4,000 Marines. It was a turkey shoot. A 4-day battle took 36 days to win. We won it. That's when the big flag was raised. Remember the famous flag on Iwo Jima? The last Japanese survivor did not surrender until 1949. In the last 2 weeks of that battle, we were actually torching human beings out of the tunnels. Why had they survived the bombings? They were in tunnels, 16 miles of tunnels, 30 feet below the surface. Well, the battle was won. 25 years after that battle, some guy, I don't know who it was, decided, wouldn't it be cool if we got everybody together, or some of the people who fought on Iwo Jima together on Iwo Jima and have a reunion? Wouldn't the Marines like to meet the Japanese soldiers they were fighting? And so they sent a letter to the surviving, by the way, 20,000 Japanese were killed, and we had 20,000 wounded Marines and 8,000 dead Marines. So they sent a letter to the survivors. Now, you're a Marine. You served on Iwo Jima. You watched your friends disintegrate next to you with an artillery shell. Disappeared, nothing left. And they say, wouldn't you like to come to Iwo Jima and meet the people you fought against? How do you think most of them reacted? You got to be kidding. What are you smoking, man? I'm not going to Iwo Jima. Well, you know what? About 115, 120 Marines decided to go. And a similar number of Japanese warriors decided to go. Why not? So they flew them to this airstrip. There are now 300 Japanese sailors positioned on this island permanently, and the only reason they're there is to find the remains of all the people that died. Their culture requires finding the dead bodies. There's still 13,000 bodies they haven't found on Iwo Jima. So they flew these guys to the island. They landed on that airstrip, and the Marines got out on one side of the strip, and the Japanese soldiers got out on the other side, and they stood there. I watched this. It was on PBS about 20 years ago. I may make you weep. They stood there for about 18 minutes just looking at each other across the runway. And the guys who had done this, I think we made a mistake. I think these guys are going to start killing each other again. But they just stood there and looked at each other for 18 minutes. You ever have any idea how long 18 minutes is in a situation like this? It's like the time between when you ask your spouse to marry her and she waits 5 hours. At the end of 18 minutes, without any signal at all, these guys who had been literally ripping each other's guts out 25 years earlier ran across that runway and embraced in the middle of that runway. And they wept and they hugged, and it was over for them. In that blinding moment, they decided it was over. They did their job, we did our job, it's over. In 2010, I was invited to go to Iwo Jima. Dave Petraeus' good friends, long story, he's a 4-star general in the Army, and arranged for me to be there on Iwo Jima for the 65th anniversary of that battle. And I watched it again. We went up on Suribachi, the Mount Suribachi and all that. But they had a nice ceremony. And there were about 40 old Japanese guys, 93 years old, and about 40 93-year-old Marines. And we had this most wonderful thing. And then when it was over, these old guys got up again, and they hobbled over and they hugged each other again. 65 years earlier, they were literally ripping each other's guts out. I'll never forget it. Now, if you've been through a divorce, somebody screwed you out of some money, somebody did something bad to you, you're probably never going to forget that. It's okay. I don't think you're expected to forget. But if you want to survive and live, decide that it doesn't matter anymore. Okay, now, in the last couple of minutes, I want you to learn some good literature with me. I want you to put all your note-taking stuff down. Just put it down, close your computers. I'm going to ask you to commit to memory a poem. You have to know who wrote it, the title, and then it makes more sense. The author of this poem is a guy named William Shakespeare. You all know William Shakespeare. Lives in Linden, cool guy. He didn't write many poems, but this one was a very poignant poem. The title of the poem is The Rape of Lucrece. And the story is about a guy named Lucius Tarquinius who is thinking about raping the beautiful Lucrece. And while he's thinking about this ugly, foul thing, these words come into his brain. And these are the words I want you to memorize today. I'm going to say it slowly, then I'm going to say it fast, and then we're going to commit it to memory together. Now catch the scene. Here's a guy about to do something really awful, and these words come into his brain. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy? Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? Or sells eternity to get a toy? For one sweet grape, who would the vine destroy? Or what fond beggar, but to touch the crown, would with the scepter straight be stricken down? Think you can learn it? You're going to learn it. Listen to it fast. Here it comes fast. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy? Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? Or sells eternity to get a toy? For one sweet grape, who would the vine destroy? Or what fond beggar, but to touch the crown, would with the scepter straight be stricken down? All right, here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to say the first line, then you repeat it back to me. I want you to enunciate every word, make the curtains move behind me. Here we go. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? Say it. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? Do the motions with me. You'll learn it faster. Now do it louder. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? Again, louder. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? Next line. A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy. What does fleeting mean? Short. Say that with me. A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy. Say it again. A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy from the beginning. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy. Next line. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? What is mirth? You know, I asked this at a high school in Ogden. I said, what's mirth? This kid jumps up. Isn't that what they gave to baby Jesus? Vocabulary. What kind of a person would buy 1 minute of happiness knowing that that minute would cause a week of pain? What kind of people do that? Dumb people do that. This is a poem about dumb people. All right, say that line with me. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? Louder. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? From the beginning. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? Next line. Or sells eternity to get a toy. What kind of a person would sell eternity for a lousy toy? Dumb people. Say that with me. Or sells eternity to get a toy. Louder. Or sells eternity to get a toy. From the beginning. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? Or sells eternity to get a toy? 2 more lines, we got it, guys. Here we go. For one sweet grape, who would the vine destroy? What kind of person would destroy an entire vine to get one lousy grape? Dumb people. All right, here we go. For one sweet grape, who would the vine destroy? Again, come on, louder. For one sweet grape, who would the vine destroy? From the beginning. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? Or sells eternity to get a toy? For one sweet grape, who would the vine destroy? 1 more line, we got it. Or what fond beggar, but to touch the crown, would with the scepter straight be stricken down? What is a scepter? Well, it's a big thing. Sometimes it's a sword. What kind of a beggar would touch a crown knowing the minute he touched the crown, he'd get wiped out by a big scepter? Dumb beggars do that. All right, here we go. Or what fond beggar, but to touch the crown, would with the scepter straight be stricken down? Again, louder. Or what fond beggar, but to touch the crown, would with the scepter straight be stricken down? That's a tough one. 1 more time. Or what fond beggar, but to touch the crown, would with the scepter straight be stricken down? From the beginning. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week? Or sells eternity to get a toy? For one sweet grape, who would the vine destroy? Or what fond beggar, but to touch the crown would with the scepter straight be stricken down. He got this from his sister. His sister came in and noticed what he was going to do and put those words in his brain. Okay, I think you've got it. So now you got to do it on your own. No help from me from the beginning. I want you to enunciate every word. Make the curtains move from the beginning. Here we go.
What am I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a thought of fleeting joy. Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week, or sells eternity to get a toy? For one sweet grace, who would the mind destroy? For one beggar, touch the ground with the
All right, we got it. Now, listen, don't do that. Now, what I've done is I have cursed you with the first line of that poem. You'll never forget the first line of that poem. If you want to reduce that from, what win I if I gain the thing I seek, you can reduce it down for your kids to, how's this going to work out? In the next 48 hours, you're going to have an opportunity to do something really stupid. Before you do it, whisper this poem to yourself and see what it does to your decision-making process. You know, you really ought to know a definition for time. Take this home and think about it. Time is the occurrence of events in sequence, one after the other. Time management has nothing to do with the clock. Zero. Time management is nothing more than you deciding which events are important to you and how you're going to put them in sequence. The one lie that you hear every day, excuse me, is I don't have time. If anybody says I don't have time, you have just heard the biggest lie on the planet. Not true. What you're really saying, if you understand that definition for time, I value something else more. We all have 24 hours. We've got to spend every second. We're not going to get one more, and you can't save any. That means when you say you don't have time, what you're really saying is I value another event more. If you invited me to go lunch with you and I said, you know, I just don't have time. Big lie. If I told her the truth, I'd rather do something else. You know what I'm saying? It's not cool to say that. But you can say I don't have time. But remember what you're saying. You value something else more. The scary thing is you have exactly the same amount of time as Warren Buffett has. Think about that.
And for those of us who are going to have lunch with Hyrum, that's the most important thing we could be doing. So if you're having lunch, please join us in the back. He's under a tight schedule, so we're going to go pretty quick. But if you want to come up and say hi, we'll give a couple minutes. But join me in thanking Hyrum Smith for coming today.
Hey, thanks, guys.